Today's subject is on what makes somebody suddenly decide to drop everything and go to become an ascetic. How does somebody wake up? People spend most of their lives basically asleep, just running from one thing to the next, not seeing further from the end of your nose. The vast majority of people don't even have an aim in the life. What is your aim? Do you have one? Most people don't. You're just running for whatever I need to do today. Not asking why you need to do it, what's the purpose of it, and what is it for? The first step for practicing Dhamma is to have something that wakes you up out of this just running for the next thing, this kind of state of being asleep. And there are a great many stories of the people from the time of the Buddha who quite suddenly would leave their life, even if they had a family, even if they had wife, children. They would leave everything, the Buddha himself is the first example, and go to live the life of an ascetic. So something has to click with them very deeply for them to do that. You don't take such a decision lightly. And for anyone who decides to practice Dhamma, it should be that there is something to wake you up, something that throws you off course and turns you in this direction. So when we think about this, we tend to think of traumatic events, for example, somebody dying close to you, or losing something very dear, or something to shock, a kind of shock to the system. But we might think it's all due to a shocking event, but it's not really this. It's not really this that can wake us up. People go through all kinds of suffering and they never gain any wisdom from that. Equally, many people just listen to the Buddha, and this teaching, what they listened to, was already so much a shock to their system that they could no longer look at the world through the same eyes. And again, similarly, many people listened to the teachings of the Buddha and said, very good, I'm going home now, without having the same kind of shock to the system. So what's the difference? What makes one person click while another person does not? And the answer is that it's in how they turn the mind back to themselves, how they question themselves, how they look into themselves based on what they hear or based on what happens to them. If you don't have the guts to put everything in yourself into question, then you can't wake up. Ajahn told us the story about how he decided to become a monk, and it was that one night he couldn't sleep, so he was lying awake late into the night, and he couldn't sleep because he had a very sharp pain in his stomach. And with this very sharp pain in his stomach bothering him, the thought came to his mind to wonder, what if I go to the doctor tomorrow and he tells me that this very sharp pain is the result of an advanced stage of cancer and I have about 1 week left to live. So what will I do? What's my aim? What's my biggest desire? What's my greatest wish? And it was as if he saw all the possibilities rolling out before his eyes, all the different ways in which he could spend his time, all the things he could do with his life, all the things he could pursue, but none of them held any interest, none of them made sense. Except for one, which was to dedicate himself to Dhamma, to practice the teaching of the Buddha and become a monk. It should be taken into account here that this wasn't coming completely out of nowhere. Ajahn at that point already had quite a bit of experience in meditation, and also his life had pushed him in this direction. He had suffered quite a few losses, and everything he attempted to build ended up collapsing. So for him at that point, he saw, okay, there's actually nothing for me except this, except to purify myself, become my own refuge, and go out of all of this. And for him, this was not just a sort of random train of thought in the middle of the night. He woke up the next morning and the pain in his stomach was gone finally. It was just a cramp. But he wasn't going to continue on with his life as normal as before. Things had changed. When he questioned himself in this way, he was really doing it sincerely and looking deeply into himself. What is the thing I want? What is my aim? And the only thing that made sense was this. So why would he go off and forget about it and continue life as before? He couldn't. It was impossible. When we hear this story, it is a good thing to ask ourselves the same question. What would I do if I knew that I was going to die in 1 week? How do I spend that time? What makes sense? Because something that is true is that we all live our lives in ignorance and blindness to the fact that there is death hanging over our lives. For most of us, if we know that we're about to die in 1 week, it really throws everything into question. It changes our whole perspective on what is important, what is not important. It makes us suddenly forced to make a decision about, okay, how do I spend this time? What can I dedicate myself to? It makes it different. But what's strange is that we live our whole lives not realizing that at some point, sooner or later, it will be 1 week before we are actually going to die. We will have only 1 week left to live. And we don't know when. Most people, they don't know in advance that in 1 week I will die. And that is the reality. That at some point we will have only 1 week left to live. But none of us live that way. We live not in accordance with that reality. We live in accordance with the unspoken, unknown idea that we always have more time. That it's always going to go on for longer, that I always have more. But this is not a good way to live. If we want to push the question even a little bit further, we could ask, suppose not only I will die in 1 week, but suppose our whole universe is going to collapse in 1 week and we knew it was going to happen. Let's say a meteorite is about to hit Earth and we know that it's about to hit Earth, but we can't do anything about it. A huge meteorite that will obliterate all life. So this is going to happen in 1 week or 2 weeks. What are we going to do? Will we continue to repair our car, go to work, do the things we normally do? Will the policeman still try to solve his crime, given that the murderer, the judge, and the lawyer will all be dead in a short time? Will we all just go into the maximum of sensuality, trying to have as much sensual pleasure as we possibly can in the time that is left? Sleeping would feel like a waste of time, but yet what other thing that we would do doesn't somehow feel like a waste of time, something that's empty, given the fact that all of this is going to disappear, was going to die. No material action makes sense in that context of a whole world that is very soon going to disappear. And yet that also is true, that everyone we know is going to die. It's not only you. Everything that is around us is going to die, not only us. Our whole earth does collapse at some point. Nothing is left. So we really don't like to think about these things. It feels kind of uncomfortable. But it was exactly this dilemma that the Buddha faced when he went forth. It was exactly this point that he saw. Nothing makes sense. Everything is useless, all this enjoyment I have, when not just myself, but all living beings have to die, have to get old, have to get sick, have to end up this way. Everything has to collapse at some point. What is the use? What can I do? The only thing that makes sense, then for him, he saw, he was brave enough to face it and find a solution. He said, I can't dedicate my life to anything else except finding a solution to that. So if we're practitioners, if we're practicing Dhamma, then we are following the Buddha in that same path. It was he who found the way out of death, the way out of disease, the way out of suffering. And we just have to follow his teaching. But what's funny is that even as practitioners who have taken this aim already, we so easily get carried away in other subjects. We forget this aim and we think it's so important to finish that job or to do this or to do that. And it's not that we should just drop everything and just sit cross-legged and do nothing else, because certainly as lay people, we kind of have no choice. We have to live, so we have to work, example. But what I mean is that our mind gets so taken up in subjects that have nothing to do with our real aim. While if we have 1 week left to live, or if we know that the whole world is going to collapse within 1 week, then there's no way we will give such things so much importance. Even we can continue to do them. We can continue to plant trees, cook, do whatever we want. We can continue to repair our car if we want. But we will do it knowing that it's just a way to pass the time, that our mind has to be occupied in Dhamma at that time. That if we are not meditating, if we are not using our time every moment to work towards our aim, then that's such a terrible waste because the time is so limited. So in order to sincerely practice Dhamma, one has to be woken up. How do you wake up? How do you come out of the intoxication of youth and health, as the Buddha was calling it? It's not just based on some shocking event, it's based on how you choose to question yourself based on that shocking event. How can you turn the mind back to yourself based on what has happened? Or just simply based on hearing a teaching or hearing a question or one element that you take and you look into it. Like the question of what will you do if you have 1 week left to live, and what is worthwhile? What is your aim? And even as people who are already practicing seriously, we should still ask ourselves these questions again and again, test ourselves with them, check how sincere we are, check how serious we are, check whether it matches what we are doing now and what we would do if we knew that we would die in 1 week. Are we practicing according to the truth of things, or are we fooling ourselves that we always have more time, that something else can have a higher priority and be more important than practicing for what is really supposedly our aim?